Welcome to your quiet corner of cosmic discovery. I'm here to share something genuinely fascinating about our universe at just the right volume for drifting off. You know, I've been thinking about how some of the incredible things we take for granted today actually trace back to the Romans, and it's quietly amazing. There's something remarkable about how their clever engineering wasn't just about big buildings, it was the backbone that helped build an entire empire. I can't wait to share some of the surprising ways their inventions still ripple through our world tonight. Should you find solace in these cosmic lullabies, consider becoming a regular dreamer by subscribing. Share what topics intrigue your curious mind in the comments below. Let's prepare for tonight's journey. Find your most comfortable position, let tension float away from your body, and take 3 slow, peaceful breaths. Beneath the velvet hush of the night, as the world's hurried clamor dissolves into a tapestry of distant echoes, let us journey back, far back, to a time when the old world was young and ambition was carved not just in story and song, but in the enduring bones of stone and mortar. In this gentle darkness, picture the ancient Mediterranean, shimmering under a Mediterranean moon, a world where the boundaries of the possible were redrawn by hands both calloused and clever, and where the murmur of water in aqueducts and the thunder of sandals on paved stones whispered of an empire is reach. Roman engineering. The phrase alone conjures images both grand and familiar, woven into the fabric of our collective imagination. We see immense colosseums rising from the earth, their arches scalloping the skyline. We glimpse aqueducts marching over valleys, their silhouettes like the vertebrae of some long-extinct leviathan. We sense the pulse of roads, straight and unyielding, radiating like veins from the heart of Rome. In so many ways these are the stones that whisper of empires. But as we settle in, let us listen not for the bombast alone. The true story, as always, is subtler, more human, and infinitely more wondrous than the myths we inherit. For myths there are, and many. Roman engineering is often remembered as a kind of magic, a sudden blossoming of genius in a world otherwise shrouded in darkness. We are told, in whispers and in textbooks, that the Romans built what none had built before, that their roads never bent to the land's will, that their aqueducts conjured water from nothing, that their concrete was a secret lost to time. We imagine a civilization set apart from its neighbors by a chasm of knowledge, their engineers solitary titans striding the world. Yet as we listen closer, the stones tell a gentler tale, a tale of learning, of borrowing, of incremental wonder. It is true that the Romans built with a grandeur that has rarely been matched. But their genius lay not in the sudden spark of invention, but in the patient accumulation of wisdom. The Etruscans, their forebears in the Italian hills, laid the first stones of arches. The Greeks, their rivals and teachers, taught them the poetry of geometry, the music of proportion. From the Phoenicians and the Egyptians, they borrowed techniques for moving water, for binding stone with lime and ash. The Romans, then, were not so much conjurers as they were alchemists, taking the base metals of prior knowledge and refining them, tempering them, forging them into something that bore their own indelible stamp. Consider, for instance, the Roman road. We have all heard the saying, "All roads lead to Rome." It is a phrase that carries the weight of inevitability, as though the world itself conspired to draw its people to the city's heart. In truth, the roads began as humble tracks worn by generations of feet and hooves, their lines tracing the natural contours of the land. The Romans, recognizing the frailty of mud and ruts, sought to make these paths endure. They layered them with gravel and sand, crowned them for drainage, and capped them with fitted stones. Each road, then, was not a denial of the land's shape, but an accord with it, an artful compromise between human will and the earth's slow resistance. Yet there is magic here too, the magic of scale. By the age of Augustus, More than 400,000 kilometers of roads laced the Roman world, their stones humming with the passage of traders, soldiers, and ideas. The Appian Way, oldest and most famed, still lies beneath the modern city, its basalt blocks worn smooth beneath centuries of feet. There is a kind of immortality in such works, a defiance of time itself. But the myth that Roman roads were always ruler straight, or that their construction was a secret known only to Rome, dissolves beneath the gaze of history. The genius lay not in the creation of the road, but in the relentless perfection of it. Let us turn our attention then to the arches, the graceful curving spans that seem to float above the ground, defying the stern pull of gravity. In their elegance, the arches of Rome seem almost inevitable, as though the stones themselves yearned for such an arrangement. Yet the arch, too, is a child of many parents. In Mesopotamia, in the lands of the Assyrians and the Babylonians, arches had long been used to span rivers and doors. The Etruscans, with their patient hands, refined the principle, understanding how the weight of a keystone could unite many stones in a single, unyielding curve. The Romans, inheriting this wisdom, multiplied it. Where others spanned doorways, the Romans spanned rivers. Where others built arches of wood, the Romans built of stone and concrete, their bridges and aqueducts leaping across valleys in serried ranks. And with each repetition, each careful calculation, the arch became not just a structure, but a symbol, a testament to the Roman belief that the world could be shaped gently but inexorably by human reason. And what of the aqueducts, those rivers in the sky? The myth persists that Romans were the first to tame the restless energy of water, to bring it to heel with channels and stone. In reality, the principle of the aqueduct was ancient, practiced by the Persians and the Greeks, whose canals and channels brought water from distant springs. But again, it was the Roman genius for scale and system that set their aqueducts apart. In the hills above the city, the Aqua Appia and the Aqua Claudia still wind their way, their gradients calculated with astonishing precision, their tunnels bored through stone with patient hands. Water, that most capricious of elements, became a servant of the city, a silent, tireless labourer, feeding fountains and baths, quenching the thirst of 1,000,000 souls. The secret, whispered by these stones, is not that the Romans invented everything anew, but that they saw the world as a puzzle to be solved, each piece borrowed, adapted, improved. The myth of the lone genius, the solitary inventor, fades in the face of this collective effort. Roman engineering was a tapestry, woven from many hands and many minds, each thread drawing strength from those that came before. Even the legendary Roman concrete, for so long shrouded in mystery, tells its own story of continuity and innovation. Pozzolana, the volcanic ash that gave Roman concrete its strength and resilience, was not unknown to other cultures. But the Romans, through careful experiment and observation, learned how to blend it with lime and water, how to pour it into molds, how to let it set under water. The Pantheon's dome, the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world even today, rises not by magic, but by the patient accumulation of knowledge, of the subtle chemistry of materials, of the balance between weight and support, of the play of forces invisible to the eye. The myth of lost Roman concrete, too, is but a shadow of the truth. The formula was not lost in some cataclysm, but faded with the empire, its secrets scattered and then, centuries later, reclaimed by new hands. And yet, the endurance of Roman concrete, its resistance to the slow gnawing of time and sea, still inspires awe. In recent years, scientists have peered into the microstructure of ancient samples, discovering the self-healing properties of pozzolanic reactions, the slow growth of crystals that seal cracks and fissures. In this, as in so much, the Romans remind us that the boundary between science and magic is often just a matter of perspective and of patience. If you listen closely, you can hear the echoes of Rome in our own world. the arches of our bridges, the grids of our cities, the pulse of water in our pipes, all bear the faint imprint of Roman hands. In popular culture, too, the image of Roman engineering persists, sometimes distorted, sometimes magnified. Films and novels show the Colosseum as a place of spectacle and savagery, but rarely do they dwell on the complexity of its construction, the labyrinth of corridors beneath the arena, the ingenious systems of pulleys and lifts, the careful distribution of weight across vaults and buttresses. The stories tend to focus on the emperors and the gladiators, the roar of the crowd, but beneath their feet lies a marvel of engineering, a machine as much as a monument. There are other myths, too, of decadence and decline, of a civilization undone by its own hubris. The fall of Rome is often painted as a sudden, catastrophic event, as though the stones themselves crumbled overnight. But the truth is, as always, more gradual, more ambiguous. The knowledge did not vanish, but was transformed, handed down in monasteries and workshops, reinterpreted and revived. Roman engineering is not a lost art, but a living tradition, its roots winding through the centuries, nourishing the growth of new wonders. Even the mythology of Rome, with its gods and heroes, finds echoes in the stones. The story of Romulus and Remus, suckled by a she-wolf, is not just a tale of origins, but of survival, of the city's ability to endure and adapt. The myths of Vulcan, god of fire and forge, speak to the transformative power of human hands, the ability to shape the world through heat and labor. The stones themselves, quarried from distant hills, bear silent witness to the toil of thousands, the unseen laborers, the engineers, the surveyors, the slaves. In their endurance, the stones become a kind of memory, a record of dreams both realized and deferred. There is in the end a humility to Roman engineering, a recognition that greatness is not achieved in isolation, but in dialogue with the past, in the steady accumulation of small insights, small improvements. The stones that whisper of empires do not boast of their own making. They speak instead of the countless hands that shaped them, the minds that calculated their curves, the eyes that measured their alignment to the stars. In the interplay of myth and reality, of legend and fact, we find a deeper kind of wonder, one rooted not in the miraculous, but in the possible. As you drift along these ancient roads, beneath arches that have stood for millennia, you may begin to sense the true legacy of Roman engineering. It is not just in the monuments that still stand, but in the way they invite us to look closer, to question the stories we tell, to seek the hidden patterns beneath the surface. The stones, if you listen, do not speak in absolutes. They whisper of continuity, of adaptation, of the quiet, persistent genius that lies within us all. And so, as the night deepens and the world outside grows still, let the soft murmurs of these ancient stones guide your thoughts. There is much yet to discover, secrets hidden in the mortar, riddles etched in the grain of stone. In the next chapters, we will follow the water itself, tracing its journey from distant springs to the heart of the city, and peer into the hidden machinery that powered the Roman world. For now, let your mind wander among the ruins, listening for the stories that linger in every arch and every road, waiting to be heard anew. Beneath the marble grandeur and sunlit piazzas of ancient Rome, beneath the clangor of chariots and the measured step of legionaries, there existed another Rome, a shadowed underbelly, a labyrinth of stone and mortar, arch and vault, pipe and channel. To walk here, even in the mind's eye, is to cross the boundary between the spectacle of empire and the silent artistry that sustained it. The Colossus of Rome, the city as a living, breathing entity, stood not only by virtue of its emperors and its armies, but by the quiet genius of its engineers, whose hands shaped the very bones and arteries of civilization. Let us begin our descent, not into darkness, but into the cool, echoing spaces beneath the surface. Here we find, first and foremost, the arch. the humble curve of stone that defies gravity and time. In the earliest days, the Etruscans had already known some secrets of the arch, but the Romans took it deeper, making it the linchpin of their architectural revolution. The principle is elegantly simple: a series of wedge-shaped stones, called voussoirs, arranged in a curve, each pressing gently against its neighbours, all weight and tension funneled into the keystone at the summit. With this configuration, stone is transformed from a brittle material into a bearer of immense loads. The arch does what flat lintels cannot. It spans wide spaces with grace and economy, and most crucially, it endures. The Roman arch appears everywhere, supporting aqueducts that stride like stone giants across valleys, forming the vaulted ceilings of basilicas and baths, and knitting together the substructures of amphitheatres. The Colosseum itself, with its forest of stacked arcades, is almost a hymn to the arch, repeated and varied in endless permutations, but there is more than art at work. The arch allowed the Romans to build bigger, higher, and lighter, to enclose vast interiors without the need for forests of columns. The spaces of Rome could thus open up, public, communal, grand. From the arch, the next leap was to the vault and the dome. The barrel vault, a simple extension of the arch into the third dimension, created tunnels and covered walkways. Intersect two barrel vaults at right angles, and you have a groin vault, its crossed lines channeling weight even more efficiently to the supporting piers below. This innovation enabled Romans to roof vast halls, the basilicas where law was dispensed, the tepidaria and caldaria of their sumptuous baths, the crypts that would later shelter Christian altars. Yet the true marvel remains the dome, perhaps the most audacious of Roman inventions. The dome begins as a circle of arches, each pressing inward, rising in a swelling curve that encloses space like the sky itself. The Pantheon, that enigmatic temple of all gods, is the supreme expression of this vision. Its dome, a nearly perfect hemisphere, spans 43 meters, unchallenged in size for over a millennium. The oculus at its apex, a great eye open to the heavens, is not just a source of light, but a relief valve for stresses, a masterstroke of engineering intuition. How did they achieve this? Modern concrete, with its steel reinforcements and precise formulae, may seem far removed from the Roman opus caementicium, but the ancient recipe was no less ingenious. The Romans mixed lime, water, and a volcanic ash called pozzolana, creating a binder that set under water, grew stronger with time, and allowed for forms that would have been impossible with stone alone. They varied the composition of the concrete as the dome rose: heavier, denser aggregate at the base, lighter pumice near the top. The coffers, sunken panels in the dome's interior, were not mere decoration, but deliberate weight-saving measures. Every decision, every curve and recess was a calculation in equilibrium, stability, and grace. The Pantheon still stands, battered but unbowed, a silent challenge to our notions of progress. How, with so little by way of modern theory and mathematics, did they conjure such audacity from stone and earth? The answer lies partly in empiricism, generations of craftsmen learning by doing, guided by rules of thumb and the whispers of experience. But there is also a mystery, a gap in our understanding. The precise mechanics of large Roman domes and vaults, the way stresses were anticipated and managed, remain topics of debate among historians and engineers even today. What did they know that we have forgotten? What calculations, if any, were carried in the minds and hands of those who laid out the wooden centering, mixed the mortar, and set the final stones? If the arch and dome were the city's skeleton, the roads and sewers were its arteries and veins. Rome's roads, the famed Viae, radiated from the city like spokes from the hub of the world. The Via Appia, the queen of roads, stretched over 500 kilometers to Brindisi, its surface of basalt slabs so expertly laid that traces endure millennia later. But the genius of Roman roads lay not only in their durability, but in their methodical construction. First, a trench was dug and filled with layers, large stones at the bottom for drainage, then gravel and sand, and finally the massive paving stones that bore the weight of armies and caravans. The road was crowned in the centre, sloping gently to the sides so that rainwater would run off, not pool and erode. Ditches flanked the roads, collecting runoff and channeling it away. Along these routes, milestones measured distance, and way stations, mansiones, offered rest and resupply. The Roman post, the cursus publicus, was a marvel in itself. Official messengers could gallop from the capital to the furthest provinces, changing horses at intervals, delivering the edicts and intelligence that knit the empire together. Roads were not mere thoroughfares. They were instruments of control, commerce and culture. They brought wheat from Egypt, marble from Anatolia, and news from distant frontiers. They were, in a sense, the neural network of the empire, the means by which Rome remained Rome, no matter how far its reach. Beneath the feet of citizens, another, less visible network pulsed: the sewers. The Cloaca Maxima, begun in the 6th century BCE, is often cited as the world's first great urban sewer. At its heart is a vaulted channel, large enough for a man to walk upright, laid with immense blocks of tufa and later lined with concrete. It collected runoff from the Forum and wastewater from the city's growing population, channeling it toward the Tiber. Smaller drains, cloacae, fed into this main artery, threading beneath streets and houses, carrying away the detritus of daily life. The Roman approach to sanitation was pragmatic, if not always enlightened. Public latrines, often grand affairs with marble seats and running water, were social spaces as much as necessities. Water, drawn from aqueducts, flushed away waste, which was then carried through the sewers and out to the river. The system was not perfect, blockages and overflows were frequent, and the Tiber itself became a foul-smelling conduit for the city's refuse. Yet compared to other ancient cities, Rome's hygiene was remarkable. The very existence of these systems speaks to a sophisticated understanding of public health, urban planning, and the unglamorous but vital business of keeping a city alive. Aqueducts, too, were more than picturesque arches marching across the countryside. They were feats of surveying and hydraulic engineering, their gradients precise to fractions of a percent, their channels lined with waterproof concrete. Water flowed by gravity alone, traversing hills and valleys, crossing rivers on high bridges, or dipping underground in inverted siphons. The Aqua Appia, the first of the great aqueducts, began humbly, but soon the city was fed by a dozen such arteries, delivering hundreds of millions of litres a day. Fountains bubbled in every square, baths and cisterns overflowed, and even the poorest insulae, the crowded apartment blocks, enjoyed a measure of access to clean water. Yet, as with so much Roman achievement, there is a tension between mastery and mystery. How did Roman engineers survey such long distances with such accuracy, lacking modern instruments? They used the chorobates, a kind of levelling bench, and the groma for right angles, and they measured gradients with astonishing care. Still, the margin for error was slim, and the cost of a miscalculation immense. One can imagine teams of surveyors pacing out the route across fields and forests, arguing in the dusk over the angle of a slope or the lay of the land. Sometimes their works failed, channels collapsed, water ran dry, and repairs had to be made. Yet more often than not, the aqueducts endured, their ancient stones still bearing water in the modern city. Delving deeper, we find that Rome's infrastructure was not merely a matter of stone and mortar, but of social and political will. The construction of great works required a mobilization of resources, slave labor, military engineers, vast quarries, and the authority to bend the landscape to imperial desire. Roads and aqueducts were strategic as well as practical. They enabled conquest, facilitated trade, and symbolized the power and benevolence of the state. The emperor's name, inscribed on a milestone or an aqueduct's dedication plaque, was a message as clear as any coin or statue. Rome endures, Rome provides. Yet for all their order and ambition, the Romans did not always understand the full consequences of their engineering. Lead pipes, used in the distribution of water, are a notorious example. The Latin word for plumbing, plumbum, is the root of our plumber, and lead was prized for its malleability. But lead is also toxic, and scholars have long debated and sometimes exaggerated its role in the decline of Roman health. Modern analyses suggest that while the water's mineral content may have mitigated some risk, the presence of lead in urban infrastructure remains a cautionary tale. The drive to solve one problem, how to carry water efficiently, can create others, unforeseen and sometimes deadly. Nor was the Roman system immune to failure. Sewers, when blocked, became breeding grounds for disease. Roads crumbled when neglected, aqueducts froze or were severed by enemies. After the empire's fall, many of these marvels were abandoned, their secrets lost or misunderstood by later generations. It is tempting, standing amid the ruins, to see only decline, but the persistence of these structures, the fragments that remain, testify to a level of skill and vision that still challenges us. There are limits to what we can know. Archaeologists sift through layers of rubble, deciphering the patterns of pipes and drains, reconstructing the routes of vanished aqueducts. Engineers model the stresses and strains of domes, testing hypotheses in wind tunnels and computer simulations. Yet there are mysteries that resist solution: the precise formulas of concrete, the methods of large-scale construction, the organization of labor and logistics. The written sources are tantalizingly vague, the physical evidence often ambiguous. Was there a lost tradition of mathematical calculation, now vanished? Or did the Romans rely on rules of thumb refined by generations of builders? The answers slip through our fingers like water through the cracks of an ancient cistern. Still, the underbelly of the Colossus invites us to look again, to question the easy narratives of progress and decline. In the arches and vaults, the silent tunnels and crumbling roads, we see not only the ingenuity of past minds, but the persistence of questions about risk and reward, about the costs of ambition, about the fragility and resilience of civilization. There is a humility, too, in recognizing how much we do not know, how much is lost beyond recovery. As night lengthens over the imagined city, the faint drip of water echoes in the sewers, and the moonlight slants across the broken stones of a forgotten road. Somewhere above, the dome of the Pantheon catches the starlight, its oculus gazing into the dark. In the hush, one might sense the presence of those ancient builders, their voices murmuring in the corridors of time, urging us onward, to puzzle, to wonder, to seek. And so, as we linger here in the substructure, listening to the slow pulse of water, the distant rumble of wagons, the whisper of wind through empty vaults, let us prepare to surface once more. For the story of Rome's engineering genius is not confined to pipes and arches alone. There is another layer, another mystery, waiting in the world above, one that reaches from the city's heart to the farthest edge of empire, and beyond, into realms of science, power and transformation yet to be explored. In the hush of a modern laboratory, under the pale glow of fluorescent bulbs, a sliver of ancient concrete rests atop a polished slab. The air hums with anticipation as a scanning electron microscope, a descendant of the very tools it now studies, prepares to peer into the heart of Roman craftsmanship. Across the millennia, the dialogue between past and present unfolds not in words, but in the silent language of minerals and molecules, of force and fracture, of secrets hidden in the grain of stone. To truly understand Roman engineering, one must become a detective of time, wielding an arsenal of instruments and strategies with the patience of an archivist and the curiosity of a child. The ruins themselves are the first tools. their battered arches, their silent aqueducts, the scars and survivals of their stones. But these ancient remnants are mute until coaxed to speak, and so, over centuries, scholars and scientists have devised ever more ingenious ways to listen. We begin, as the Romans themselves might have, with the simplest of tools, the eye and the hand. It is through careful observation that the first riddles present themselves. Why does the dome of the Pantheon still stand, unbowed by time, when younger structures have crumbled? What is it about the stones of the Pont du Gard, the aqueduct leaping over the Garden River, that allows them to bear their own weight and the burden of water year after year? The answers are not immediately apparent, for the Romans were both practical and subtle, hiding their genius in details overlooked by the untrained observer. And so the first line of inquiry is drawn with chalk and calipers. Archaeologists survey the sites, mapping every joint and fissure, every curve of arch and gradient of incline. They sketch and measure, tracing the outlines of lost scaffolds and vanished wooden forms, reconstructing not just what was built, but how. In the dust of ruined forums, they sift for clues, a fragment of tile, a sliver of mortar, a nail twisted by centuries of earth. Each artifact is catalogued and compared, placed in the context of its kin, forming a mosaic of possibility. But the eye and the hand, though essential, are only the beginning. As the centuries turn and the questions deepen, new tools emerge, lenses to magnify, acids to tease apart, balances to weigh with precision undreamed of by Vitruvius or Pliny. The microscope, first a plaything of the Renaissance, becomes a gateway to the microcosm. Under its gaze, Roman concrete reveals itself as a miniature landscape. Crystals of lime, shards of volcanic ash, a dance of voids and bridges, each component chosen with purpose. The structure of opus caementicium, the Roman recipe for concrete, is not a haphazard jumble, but an engineered microclimate, a world within a world. Yet even the microscope is but a single note in the symphony of discovery. To decipher the composition of Roman materials, chemists reach for spectrometers and chromatographs. In a process called X-ray diffraction, beams of invisible light bounce through the ancient stone, scattering like bats in a cavern. The patterns they make are signatures, each mineral leaving a trace, a fingerprint. From these, the scientists reconstruct the recipes long lost, the proportions of pozzolana, the ratios of lime to sand, the secret admixtures of brick dust and marble chips. Sometimes a fragment of pigment betrays the ghost of a mural. Sometimes a trace of lead whispers of water pipes and plumbing. But the tools are not all modern, nor the experiments confined to the laboratory. Across the world, engineers and artisans join in the grand experiment of replication. They gather volcanic ash from Pozzuoli, as Roman builders once did, and slake quicklime with water, watching it hiss and steam. With wooden moulds and iron trowels, they shape arches and vaults, recreating the forms first imagined beneath Italian skies. These reconstructions are not merely acts of homage, but laboratories in their own right. Each collapse, each crack, each unexpected triumph or failure a data point in the experiment of understanding. In these acts of making, the past and present intermingle. The scent of wet lime, the scrape of trowel on stone, the slow curing under sun and rain. These are sensations the Romans themselves would have known. And so, in the act of building, modern scholars learn not only what the Romans did, but how it felt to do it. The weight of a block, the tension in an arch, the delicate balance between strength and grace. Sometimes the grandest tool is not a device, but a question. Why does Roman concrete, exposed for 2,000 years to the erosions of sea and sky, remain so tenacious? Why do the breakwaters of Ostia and the piers of Baiae resist the hungry waves when modern cements dissolve within decades? To answer, chemists dissolve slivers of ancient concrete in acid. analyzing the resulting soup for telltale ions. Geologists slice polished cross-sections and gaze at them under polarized light, hunting for rare minerals, a luminous tobermorite, a crystal that forms only under peculiar conditions and which confers a self-healing power to the concrete. The Romans, unwitting alchemists, had stumbled upon a formula that modern science only recently began to understand, a formula whose magic is revealed piece by piece by the patient work of analysis. There are experiments of scale as well as substance. In the city of Rome itself, engineers have modelled the stresses borne by the Pantheon's dome, its vast unreinforced expanse a marvel that defies intuition. With computer simulations, they map the flow of forces, tracing how the weight of the oculus is funneled down through concentric rings, each band of concrete made lighter and airier as it climbs. They test the hypothesis that the Romans used pumice, a feather-light volcanic stone, in the uppermost reaches, lightening the load even as they thickened the walls. These simulations are tested in miniature, with scale models loaded until they fracture, the point of collapse revealing the hidden strengths and weaknesses of the ancient design. Even the flow of water, the lifeblood of Rome, is subject to experiment. Hydrologists trace the gradients of aqueducts, marveling at the precision, often less than a centimetre of drop per 100 metres, maintained over tens of kilometres. With dyes and miniature channels, they recreate the flow, observing how sediment settles, how air is purged from pipes, how the infamous Roman siphon, a stone tube that dips below valley floors, transmits water uphill, defying the simple logic of gravity. The tools here are both ancient and new, wooden rods to measure depth, laser rangefinders to map subtle slopes, computer models to simulate the hydraulics of the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer. To peer into the very bones of the aqueducts without disturbing them, researchers wield ground-penetrating radar, a device that sends pulses of radio energy into the earth and listens for echoes from hidden voids and buried conduits. In this way, lost branches of the Aqua Claudia, forgotten for centuries beneath fields and roads, are rediscovered, their courses plotted anew. Sometimes, remote sensing reveals the ghosts of entire towns, their layouts traced in the shadows of foundations and cisterns, the pulse of Roman water still echoing in the soil. Yet for all these technological marvels, some of the most profound insights come from the simplest of acts, the careful reading of ancient texts. The writings of Vitruvius, the architect who penned De Architectura, serve as both guide and puzzle. His descriptions are tantalizingly precise in some places, maddeningly vague in others. When he writes of Pozzolana from the Bay of Baiae, or of the proper inclination of the arch, he offers more than mere recipe. He grants a glimpse into the mind of the builder, the logic of the design. Scholars pore over these lines, cross-referencing with physical evidence, testing each claim as a hypothesis. Sometimes an obscure phrase, "the stones must be laid in headers and stretchers," is the key to an enduring riddle. The dialogue between text and artifact is itself a tool of inquiry, a method as rigorous as any chemical assay. When the two align, a hypothesis gains strength. When they diverge, new questions arise. Did the Romans always follow their own advice? Did local builders innovate, or did they adhere to the canon? The answers are often found not in grand monuments, but in humble remains, a rural bridge, a wall of a farmhouse, a sewer running beneath a forgotten street. There is a poetry, too, in the tools themselves. The Roman surveyor's groma, a simple cross of wood and string, allowed the laying out of straight roads and right angles with astonishing accuracy. Replicas built today reveal the care and calibration required, the patience to wait for windless moments, the steady hand needed to sight along the plumb lines. The chorobates, a long wooden trough filled with water, enabled the measurement of gentle slopes for aqueducts, its precision rivaling that of modern levels. When modern engineers reconstruct these tools and use them to lay out lines over hills and fields, they find, to their wonder, that the ancient devices still perform with uncanny reliability. The physical and digital merge in 21st century Rome. Laser scanners, perched atop tripods, sweep beams of light across the ruins, capturing every undulation of stone with millimeter accuracy. The data is rendered into three-dimensional models, allowing virtual walks through spaces long closed to the public or even vanished from the landscape. These digital reconstructions can be manipulated and tested, subjected to simulated earthquakes, floods, and fires, revealing how the structures might have responded to catastrophe. In the glow of a computer screen, the past is made present, every detail preserved for future study. But the pursuit of understanding is not always smooth. Sometimes the tools fail or lead astray. A sample mislabeled, a simulation based on faulty assumptions, an ancient text misread. Each misstep is a reminder that the past is not an open book, but a labyrinth. The work is slow, iterative, requiring humility as much as brilliance. The tools of Titans are not only those of iron and glass, but of patience, skepticism, and the willingness to revise cherished theories in the face of new evidence. In the heart of this endeavor lies a paradox. Even as our tools grow more sophisticated, we are brought ever closer to the hands and minds of those who built with nothing but stone, lime, and vision. Each experiment, each act of reconstruction is a step into their world, a world where the boundaries between science and art, between invention and tradition, blur and dissolve. There are mysteries yet unsolved, puzzles that no microscope or computer can fully unravel. What was the daily rhythm of a Roman building site? How did knowledge pass from master to apprentice, from one generation to the next? What did it feel like to stand atop a newly finished aqueduct, watching the first water shimmer and flow beneath the midday sun? The tools we wield today bring us closer, but the final answers hover just beyond reach, shimmering like a mirage on the horizon. And so, the search continues, each new technique opening further vistas, each discovery raising fresh questions. In the shadows of the ruins and the glare of the laboratory, the conversation between past and present goes on, unending, ever deepening. The tools of Titans, ancient and modern, lie ready for the next question, the next turning of the earth, the next whisper from the stones. The night deepens, and somewhere a fragment of mortar waits to tell its tale, a puzzle half solved, a door half opened, a journey not yet complete. Beneath the gentle hush of twilight, as the last gold of day slips behind the stone bones of the ancient world, the echoes of Rome linger in the air, subtle, persistent, woven into the very fabric of the places we inhabit and the ways we think. There is a strange poetry in the endurance of old stones and the silent transmission of ideas, a chain of influence that ripples outward from antiquity, its effects felt in the most ordinary corners of modern life. The aqueducts may stand ruined and the roads may have crumbled, but the Roman way of shaping the world endures, not merely in brick and mortar, but in the deep currents of human ambition and ingenuity. As dusk settles, let us walk slowly through the shadowed arches of a Roman aqueduct, its silhouette black against the cooling sky. The stones are silent now, but once they were the arteries of an empire, carrying water, the essence of life, from distant hills into the heart of civilization. This was more than mere utility. It was the assertion of order over chaos, an inscription of human will upon the body of the earth. The Romans, in their relentless pursuit of mastery, shaped rivers, carved mountains, and bent the landscape to their needs. Their engineers were alchemists of stone and water, conjuring abundance from scarcity, channeling the caprice of nature into predictable, nourishing flow. Yet, as we trace our hand across the rough-hewn blocks, we sense that Roman engineering was never simply a matter of function. There was always beneath the surface a yearning for permanence, a desire to leave a mark that would outlast the fleeting lives of men. Each aqueduct, each bridge, each amphitheatre was an offering to time itself, a wager that stone and thought, properly joined, might defy the slow grinding of centuries. The inscription on a dedicatory plaque, half erased by wind and rain, still murmurs its promise, for the use and glory of the people, for the eternity of Rome. And there is pride here, certainly, but also an anxiety, an awareness that all things pass, that even empires crumble, that memory is fragile and history is easily lost. If you listen, in the hush that follows sunset, you can almost hear the echo of Roman footsteps on flagstones, the distant laughter of water in ancient pipes, the measured cadence of builders and dreamers whose names have long since faded. Their legacy is not just a collection of monuments, but a living question. What does it mean to build, to endure, to strive for greatness in a world that is always changing? It is tempting to see Roman engineering as a triumph of reason over nature, a story of conquest and control. Certainly the Romans were masters of calculation, their surveyors and architects wielding mathematics as deftly as any legionnaire wields a sword. They invented new forms of concrete, devised ingenious vaults and domes, developed water mills and heating systems that prefigured the comforts of the modern age. Yet, within and around these technical achievements, there pulses a deeper, more mysterious urge, the longing to be remembered, to bind together communities, to create spaces where life could unfold with dignity and purpose. Consider for a moment the Via Appia, the Queen of Roads, unfurling its straight, unyielding path from Rome to the far reaches of empire. The stones beneath your feet are worn smooth by centuries of travellers, merchants and soldiers, pilgrims and poets, each carrying their own hopes and burdens. The road is a symbol of movement, of connection, of the restless search for order in a world of distance and difference. To build a road is to declare a faith in the future, to believe that others will follow, that the journey will continue after you are gone. The Via Appia is not only a feat of engineering, it is a thread in the vast tapestry of human longing, a line drawn across the landscape in defiance of oblivion. And what of the cities that flourished at the terminus of those roads? Look, if you will, down the colonnaded streets of a Roman forum, where merchants once haggled and philosophers debated, where laws were proclaimed and justice sought. The very design of these spaces, the careful alignment of streets, the ordered placement of temples and baths, speaks of a vision in which the individual and the collective are joined. Roman engineering was civic at its heart. It sought not only to shelter bodies, but to shape minds, to create the conditions for a shared life. In this, there is a kind of moral architecture at work. The Romans understood that the built environment could cultivate habits of discipline, cooperation, and pride. The public bath, with its sequence of warm and cold rooms, its pools and porticos, was more than a place to wash. It was a theatre of sociability, a training ground for the virtues of citizenship. The amphitheatre, with its soaring vaults and perfect sightlines, turned the spectacle into a communal ritual, binding together rich and poor in a common experience. The basilica, with its vast nave and echoing columns, provided a stage for law and commerce, a space where disputes could be resolved and bargains struck. These were not accidental byproducts of technical skill, but the fruits of a philosophy that saw engineering as a means of shaping not just matter, but meaning. The Romans, heirs to the Greeks but restless in their own way, believed that to build well was to live well, that the ordering of stones could mirror the ordering of souls. It is a lesson that lingers quietly in the grid of our streets and the rhythm of our days. Yet, for all its grandeur, Roman engineering was also marked by limits, by failures and blind spots, by the inescapable entropy of time. The aqueducts that once glittered in the sun now stand broken and overgrown, their channels choked with silt and silence. The roads, so straight and sure, are fractured by the heaving of earth, their milestones toppled and unreadable. The forums are hushed, their statues faceless, their columns gnawed by centuries of wind and rain. The empire that dreamed of eternity has itself become a ruin, a memory flickering at the edge of darkness. But perhaps this is the truest legacy of Roman innovation, not the illusion of permanence, but the acceptance of impermanence, the recognition that every act of building is also an act of hope, a gesture toward a future that cannot be guaranteed. The Romans built as if they would last forever, but they also built with an awareness that nothing does. Their engineers learned to adapt, to repair, to innovate in the face of disaster. When a bridge collapsed, it was rebuilt. When a city burned, it rose again, altered but undaunted. The story of Roman engineering is not a story of unbroken triumph, but of resilience, of the capacity to endure and begin anew. In our own time, we walk paths they laid and drink water from their reservoirs. We borrow their arches and domes, their laws and languages. But more than this, we inherit their restless questioning, their refusal to accept the world as given, their determination to leave a trace, however fleeting, upon the shifting sands of history. The spirit of Roman engineering is alive in every act of creation, in every effort to bind together the scattered fragments of our lives into something whole and meaningful. Let us pause then, in the quiet of the evening, and consider the strange continuity that links us to those distant builders. It is easy, in the glare of modernity, to imagine ourselves as wholly new, as creatures of a different order. Our tools are swifter, our reach vaster, our dreams more extravagant. Yet the old questions persist. How shall we shape the world? What shall we leave behind? How can we balance the demands of necessity and beauty, of utility and wonder? The answers, if they exist, are hidden in the interplay of shadow and light, in the silent testimony of ruined walls and empty forums. The Romans remind us that every act of engineering is also an act of imagination, a leap into the unknown, a wager on the future. To build is to hope, to risk, to believe that what we make can matter, if only for a moment. There is a humility in this perspective, a gentle acknowledgement of the limits of power. The Romans, in their grandeur, were never immune to failure, to the slow unravelling of plans, the corrosion of pride, the inescapable return of chaos. The Tiber, constrained by embankments and channels, still floods. The stones, so carefully set, still tumble in the earthquake's grip. Yet, in the face of these uncertainties, they built anyway, trusting in the possibility of renewal. Their legacy endures not only in what they achieved, but in what they attempted, in the vision that animates every bridge, every theatre, every span of road. It is a vision that sees the world not as a fixed and finished thing, but as a field of possibility, open to the shaping hand of human will. In this, Roman engineering is less a body of techniques than a way of being, a stance toward the world at once humble and audacious, cautious and bold. And in the silent hours, when the city sleeps and the old stones glow faintly in the moonlight, one can almost feel the pulse of that ancient ambition, a heartbeat echoing through the ages, urging us onward. The aqueducts, the roads, the forums, these are not just relics, but invitations, reminders that the work of building is never finished, that the dream of order flickers still in the darkness. As we drift, then, into the soft embrace of night, let us carry with us the memory of those who built before us, their hopes and fears, their failures and triumphs. Let us listen, in the hush of sleep, for the echoes of their voices, whispering across the centuries. The empire has fallen, but its spirit endures, in the stones beneath our feet, in the water that flows unseen beneath the city, in the restless, searching minds of those who dream of building something that will last. Somewhere beyond the reach of light, in the endless turning of time, the work continues. The arches rise, the roads unfurl, the water runs cool and clear. The empire is dust, but the vision endures, a thread of meaning running through the labyrinth of history, binding past and present in a quiet, unbreakable bond. And so, as the night deepens and the world grows still, the echoes of Rome linger. They are with us always, in what we build and what we dream, in the fragile beauty of impermanence, in the ceaseless, patient labour of hope. In this gentle darkness, we are not alone. We are the heirs of builders, the children of engineers, the keepers of an ancient, restless flame. And somewhere in the deep hush between waking and sleep, the stones remember. As our journey through the marvels of Roman engineering drifts to a close, like a comet tail fading into the hush of space, may your thoughts gently wander through arches and aqueducts woven into the fabric of time. Rest now in the quiet glow of ancient wonders, and when you seek new Dreamtime tales, return to travel once more among the stars of science and story.